Thank you for coming back. This is our third installment of the Enter the Matrix Skype chats. And as you can see up on the screen, today we're visiting with Wendy Red Star, and I'm really excited about this conversation. So I feel silly introducing myself, but since we're going to put this on the interweb. So my name is Heather Otto, and I'm the curator of Native American and Non-Western art here at the Fred Jones, and I'm really happy you all are here. I'm really happy you are here, Wendy. And I am going to ask you guys just to remember to silence your phones. Occasionally people have to take a phone call. If you need to do that, would you please step outside so that we don't get your phone call recorded on the audio? And also, of course, it's important to be grateful, and I want to just thank again Karen Bowles, who helped make the arrangements, Jessica Farling, who's handling all the technical aspects, and Mark White, who is our museum director, who's providing support for this program. As an introduction, I'd like to just say a few words about Wendy. And so Wendy was born in 1981 just outside the Crow Indian Reservation, where she was raised in a multicultural family. She attended Montana State University in Bozeman, where she studied sculpture. She went on to earn her MFA in sculpture at UCLA. She's previously taught as an adjunct professor at Portland State University. She currently lives in Portland, Oregon, where she is a full-time artist. Since completing her formal education, Red Star has gone on to incorporate a range of imagery and media into her work. While her sculptural interests are evident, it is through her photography and printmaking that she has gained national attention recently. Her work is bound together through a conceptual exploration of the underlying cultural philosophies that express her Crow identity within contemporary imagery. Because of the complexity of the interrelationships that exist between traditional cultural practice, one that is seen by Native artists as necessary and desirable, the continued and desirable contemporary Natives, and the continued exploitation of cultural identity, Red Star's art is an astute observation and commentary on the need for continued exploration for how to express Native American experience and identity in the 21st century. Of course, this is all related to the Enter the Matrix exhibition, which is on exhibit right now. And so to get us started, what I'd like to ask is if you could speak to how you got introduced to printmaking from having done all the studies you did in sculpture.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be able to speak and to share some of my artwork. And this is my first time Skyping into a class, so this is great. So I started into printmaking because I got a residency at Crow Shadow Institute of the Arts, which is a wonderful residency on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And it's something that I knew about starting back in like 2006. And I just thought it was a really great program. But the other thing is that you didn't have to know anything about printmaking, which I didn't know anything about printmaking, and that they were willing to collaborate with you, and you worked directly with a master printer. So I believe I did my residency, I want to say in 2011 with them. And then I just finished a residency over this last summer, a second residency with them, which was really exciting.
So you did the first residency and got introduced, and Frank Janssens, the master printer there at Crow Shadow. And how did he help you to take your ideas, and what did you bring that you thought, oh, this is how I want to explore printmaking as somebody who's coming new into a new medium?
Yeah, well, it's funny because last time, this last residency, I was drawing on paper and with color crayons and cutting out images that I had photographed at Crow Fair, and it looked really, I think the term we used, the term I said to Frank was like, you can take my kindergarten work and turn it into like postgraduate work, basically. And that's just how it is, where he really allows the freedom of you to be the conceptualist and the idea maker, and then he helps you to then produce these beautiful prints. So when I first went, I really had no clue what wanted to do, other than I had a bunch of photographs. And so it kind of went from there, where I pulled photographs that I really was drawn to. For instance, some photographs that my dad had taken in the 70s of Crow Fair. And then really kind of worked with those, or pictures that I took of the housing on the Crow Reservation, that kind of thing. And this time around, I was more strategic. I knew I wanted to use photographs again, but I really wanted to talk about parade cars and incorporating blankets that were on the parade cars as the backgrounds and stuff like that. And what Frank helps you do is, since he's a master printmaker, it seems like it would be really simple, like you just this color and that color, but it's not, because it's all layered. And that's something that I don't think people really understand. They see the final print, but they don't understand everything that goes into it. Like, there's different plates that we have to burn. Well, one of my latest prints is 8 different plates. So, you know, it's 8 different colors that he has to roll over, and it's quite a process, and I don't even get to mix the color. So that's something that's so hard when you're an artist who just used to doing everything yourself, to then have to sit down and verbally kind of communicate with the master printer for a particular shade of pink. And it can really be about, what it boils down to is communicating back and forth verbally. And he's actually sort of like your hand in making things. So it's really interesting.
The print that we have in Enter the Matrix is one of those from the first visit you made to Crow's Shadow, and it has the trade blanket style design behind the car, and then that's a photograph that's been, I believe, shinkleed onto the surface. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
And the blanket that you have, did you come in with the idea to put the blankets behind the photographs, or was that something that sort of evolved while you were at the Crow Shadow?
It all evolved there. It really was, the photograph was sort of the base for everything and all the decision making. Once I narrowed down what images I wanted to focus on, then everything else kind of unfolded with it. And to me, Crow Fair and parade culture is all about the blankets that you have and that you parade. So it just made sense to me. And universally, seeing those sort of serape blankets, you see them. You know, I'm now in Portland, Oregon, and if I go to the Warm Springs Reservation, I can see them hanging in people's windows in their houses. And so it's very kind of universal blanket or design that you see throughout Indian country. So it's even broader than Crow country. And for me, that was, that made sense. And the particular blanket and colors that I chose looked very, very atmospheric and very much like a sunset. And I just thought, yeah, it makes sense. They're riding off into this serape blanket sunset, you know.
And that's, you know, the idea of blankets perform a particular role within Native cultures as, you know, obviously there's the function of a blanket that just keeps you warm, but there's also the function of a blanket as, you know, cultural reciprocity that is cross-tribal. You know, my own community, we do the same thing. And, you know, we're here in Oklahoma, which is not that close to Crow Reservation. So that's one of the things that I don't know if all the students know about, is just that reciprocity is an incredibly important factor within Native communities to both honor people, to recognize people's service, or just to acknowledge if somebody's done a really good job. People might get it just even at a high school graduation, so it doesn't have to be like a returning, you know, war veteran or something, but that also would be an appropriate gift. And for you to use them in as a background of sorts, it sort of engages your images in that conversation that is within sort of a traditional cultural perspective, but it also is an incredibly engaging visual, you know, surface that your photographs are getting attached to. I wonder if one of the things with the photographs that you do is that you do make a lot of specific cultural references that you're making not only in the blankets as you know, as part of the overall composition, but also many of the images, and you mentioned parade culture, which is something I'm not sure. How many of you would understand what she meant by parade culture? A few hands. So there was, out of all those students, there was 4 hands that went up. Do you want to speak to that for a minute? Because I think you'd probably do a better job than I will.
Yeah. So where I grew up on the Crow Reservation, we have a celebration called Crow Fair. It happens every 3rd weekend in August. And as part of that celebration, each of the families sets up camps and teepees. It's known as the teepee capital of the world. And it's something that I grew up from a small child, and my father from a small child, and so on, participated in. And what they do each morning is they parade around the camp. And they dress up their horses and cloak them in blankets and regalia, and you wear your finest regalia. And they also have vehicles that they dress exactly kind of like horses as well. And what the parade represents every morning when we do it is it symbolizes us moving to another camp like we used to. So it's kind of this really beautiful metaphor, but that's what I mean by parade culture. And it's something that is so very much Crow, but as soon as I left and around Pendleton and Umatilla, they're a very big parade culture, and the Nez Perce also parade, so it's something that's beyond just my reservation, but that's what I mean by parade culture.
We have that here in Oklahoma as well. Some of my earliest memories are going to the American Indian Expo in Anadarko, and there are humiliating photos of me sitting on top of the fronts of cars because everybody dressed their grandkids up. And before I was old enough to protest. Yeah. So that's something that I think is respected, you know, especially in the Plains communities, because that was part of how, when you would come into, as I was told, that was how you could, when you came to another camp, that you would parade in, and there was a way of expressing sort of the hierarchy within your own community to the people with whom you were arriving, so that it was a way of sort of the status conveyor for people who don't know who you are, right?
Yes.
So these are all part of the history of that, as well as I think the moments you're describing up with the Crow Fair. You also use a lot of self-portraiture, and I don't know that the images that you provided or the one that's in the show, I don't think any of those are necessarily self-portraits, but I know that's something you've done, and I just wonder if you want to speak to that, because I think that's something that we see a lot of Native artists doing, a lot of artists, period, of course.
Yeah.
But how is that important for you to put yourself within the images that you're creating?
Well, I think the most famous pieces that I've done where I've used self-portraits, portraiture, was when I was in graduate school at UCLA, and though that series is called The Four Seasons, but I did a bunch of, most of my work had me within it. And at the time, that's when I was like 23, 25. And for me, I was the only Native student in my graduate program. And so for me, it was more that I wanted to speak specifically about being Crow and a Crow woman and my own kind of personal experience. So it made sense for me to be in my images, and also I know exactly what I want, versus if I would have worked with somebody and had to direct them in that. So for me, it was very much, very, very, very important that I be the person in the photographs. And now I still do photographs with myself in them, but I've done other series where I completely cover my face. And it's speaking on something different, where I think if my face is actually in the photograph, it would be more of a distraction than if it's not in there. So there's the meaning and purpose behind that as well. Yeah.
Both the revelation, but also the things that people don't see.
Yeah. And it's just easy. Go, like, call somebody up, or like, I can be as slow as I want to, or those kind of things. Where if you are collaborating with somebody else, there's a bunch of other factors that tie into the work. Yeah. And I work a lot in isolation, so I like to, and I don't have very much time. So for me to have to get people together is not time that I really afford myself.
One of the, so Jessica Farling and I, she's here in the auditorium, we have been following your Instagram. Thank you.
Oh.
Whoever remembered that. One of the students remembered that. And there's that, and then also on Facebook, and you regularly use the hashtag #AbsolukaFeminist, and I might have mispronounced that. But would you describe what you mean by that? Because I know for a lot of people, the idea of feminism, sometimes with Native communities, it doesn't have the same meaning, and I'm just curious about how you're using it and what it means to you.
Yeah, so Apsaluga, feminist, I think it's just kind of, I look at things always with, I'm very serious about things. I take things very seriously, but I always look at things from a very skewed angle. So everything to me has a hint of humor to it. And I think for Crow society back in the day, it was all matriarchal, and everything passed down through the female. But that's not the world that we live in. I mean, we still carry on some of those traditions. You still use your mom's clan, that kind of thing. But there's something about, for me, with the reason why I state that is because in the art world, outside of the art world, but I guess I'm speaking more specifically within the art world, there are not very many Native female artists. And to me, for me, I want to put my stamp on that, and things that I find to be very feminine, but very powerful. I always like to use Apsaluga feminist on that. And so for me, it's more kind of like a power thing. I'm using it as a power thing, and that I just do feel like the arts is dominated by males. And then when you break down to the contemporary Native arts world, it's still dominated by Native males. And so for me to have a very strong Native female voice is important, and to show that. So so I created that hashtag. And for me, it's like it's another art project where when you type in that hashtag, there are all these different images of what I consider to be Apsaluga feminist. You know, some of them are me. Some of them are pictures of my ancestors. Or some of them are different events that I've attended or shows that I've been in. So that's where that's coming from.
That's interesting to me because my family is also, our tribe is also matriarchal, and I've never understood how come men didn't want to listen to me more, so including my older brothers. But I think part of it too is that I was raised with within a family and a community for whom, you know, people like my grandmother were, you know, steadfast in affirming our roles. And also in small ways, we have these gender roles that, like in our family and in our communities, the men always eat first. And the women prepare the food, but the men eat first. But that's not to put women secondary. It's just to recognize the men's role as well, so that there's balance, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that for a lot of people outside the Native community, those gender roles often look sort of archaic. And yet, even in my own family, we still practice that. My daughter's been raised to, let her older brother and her father eat first. And these are small things. It's not that they eat first, but they get served first. These are small things for us to remember our roles, but also because we need each other, and we need each other to be strong.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that Native communities offer, that in the grand Western world, there's an imbalance, and where you have like chauvinism and feminism as opposite poles of each other.
Yeah.
Where in Native communities, they might be at opposite poles, just like positive and negative, but they are interrelated and necessary to be in harmony as well. And anyways, I've always appreciated that you use that, but I thought that it would be interesting for the students to kind of hear you speaking about that and how it fits for you, as a Crow woman, as a Crow mother, to be reiterating the strength and recognizing that that strength is necessary in a contemporary world, sometimes more than people realize.
Yeah, we do also in Crow culture, the women have separate tasks that they do, and I've run into that same conversation where, the women put up the teepees and, gather the wood and all that kind of stuff, and I've run into people saying, well, that's, like you said, seems more archaic or something, but to me that those are the practices and the roles, and it wasn't because they were unequal. They were very much equal. Like, so I've run into that conversation too, which I think is interesting and speaks to both like kind of the colonial world stance, even if we're being like feminists and things like that, but not taking into account like other cultural views and what they might see as being like, I don't know, equal and feminist, and that it isn't a woman like just doing house chores and things like that. So I think that's really important. But yeah, I just don't think there's enough Native female artists out there with a voice, and that have made it. I can think of like Rebecca Belmore as being a great female Native artist, but there's several other men like Jimmy Durham who've had huge success, and James Luna. I can name a few others, but there certainly has been a lot more males, Native males, that have gotten further along within the arts.
This is true, and I think the contemporary art world likes to get behind whoever is the taste du jour of the Native community, and that's an interesting dynamic, because the person who might be that selected or identified person, how well they represent is also another question. Because I've heard from a lot of Cherokee people that it's frustrating that Jimmy Durham is the most well-known, internationally known Cherokee artist, and yet his work has very little to do with, and he has very little to do with the Cherokee Nation and identity. So I think those are complicated things for Native artists, but I suppose it's true for other aspects of the contemporary art world as well. So we only have a little bit of time left, and we're not on any real strict timeline, but I want to be respectful that we've just asked you for a small bit of your day. We did prepare the students the handout with the images, and I wonder if you'd like to speak to the projects that you're working on and just tell them about what they're looking at and whatever you want to share with them.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to pull up my email and find the images that I sent you. So I'm looking at it. I'm very excited because I'm going to be curating a contemporary Native art show. I'm very passionate about contemporary Native arts. And when I was teaching at Portland State University, I used to teach contemporary Native arts, and my students would actually, I would show them a list of over 50 contemporary Native artists, and they would do interviews, email-based interviews, because I thought the best way to learn about the artist's work is to talk to the artist, which you guys are doing right now. And so we created a blog. It's called Contemporary Native Artists at Tumblr, and it's got like I don't even know, like 80,000 followers now. And it's a great little archive if you want to know more about contemporary Native arts. I think there's about 36 interviews, and then I cataloged contemporary Native artists and their websites, or if they didn't have websites, where you could see some of their work. So with this show, this will be the second time I've done curated a contemporary Native arts show, and this is going to be in Utah, in Ogden, Utah, at the university there, and it's eight artists. So one of the images I sent was a screenshot of me talking to Raymond Wajali, and he's a really great Haida artist. He lives in Vancouver, BC, and that's some of the work that we will be showing in the group show. So it's 4 women, 4 men. Raymond's one, Peter Morin, who else is in there? Dwayne Linklater, and so horrible. Raymond, Peter, Dwayne, and John Fedoroff. And then the females are Tanya Lincoln Linklater, Amelia Winger Bearskin, Elise Harkins, and Tana Silton. So that's going to be opening in February. I'm quite excited about it. And then I also sent you images from my latest Crow Shadow presidency, and basically what I did, since I knew I was going to go to Crow Shadow, I wanted it to make it all about Crow Fair. So I went to Crow Fair and I photographed as many parade cars as I could. And one of the images you see are 3 parade cars. And then basically for the background, I took out some of the different Pendleton blanket designs, own colors, formalized my own colors for it. But all those blanket designs that are on the cars are kind of a reference to the background. And that one's actually, I think that one's like the 9 or 8 plate print. And then the other image, there's a really iconic image that my father took in the 70s, and I decided I wanted to do that again. It's sort of in reference to the one that you exhibited with the other parade car, but this is the Yakima woman. I thought it was interesting too because it says Yakima on her car, but it's spelled the old way, not the way that they spell it now. It's spelled with an I, and now they spell it with an A. So the title's Yakima, one spelled that way and one spelled the other way. And this again is a Pendleton blanket design. And Crow Shadow Institute of the Arts is on the Umatilla Reservation, but it's right outside of Pendleton, Oregon. So it was a great excuse for me to go to the factory and buy blankets. There's an image of my dog in the yard with a bunch of deer and coyotes. So I'm having a solo show that's coming up in January at the Ha Contemporary Gallery. And for me, that show, I want to kind of get back to my sculptural background, and I want to play with form and color. So basically what I'm doing is getting these animal hunting decoys ready for that, and they're going to be my material that I use. But the rooms will be kind of blocked off in color, and I'm also using Pendleton blankets. So it's going to look very different from how it looks right now, but I always find it really interesting when you're learning about an artist to actually see the behind the scenes, not just the finished product and how they work. So my studio is in my living room, and occasionally I have to go out in my backyard and spray paint, and my dog has to hang out with weird plastic animals. So that's that image. And then the final image is, oh, not the final image, there's a miniature parade car. And it's one of those cars that parents buy for their toddlers. I don't know why you would. They're like $500. And the kids can actually drive them. And so that's just an example of the beginnings of a miniature parade cars that I'm going to make, which I will deck out with beadwork and try to make them as close to reality as possible. But the miniature cars have MP3 players, so you can make your own soundtrack. So I'm working on that. Maybe you'll have the sounds of the parade. I have a cousin who's a rap artist, so I thought, well, maybe it could be his rap music in there. I don't know. There's room to grow on that piece. And the last piece is a picture of my daughter at past Crow Fair, 8, and then there's a picture of me when I was 8 at Crow Fair. And this one is really about kind of the pass down from female to female. And how I decided I wanted to kind of mirror this, because Crow Fair is very important. It's something that I grew up doing, so it's something that she's going to grow up doing. But everything in here has significance. So the rose beadwork that she is wearing is actually beaded by my mom, but the roses were hand-drawn by my grandmother, and she was known for making these really amazing rose patterns and beadwork and on shawls. And then so what I did was I took her rose patterns and kind of copied them and drew them out and created this background, which you see in behind us. So it's all my grandma's rose pattern designs. And then we took a small square of the blue background, the blue beaded background, and we burned that onto a plate. So I don't know if it comes up in the printed handout sheets, but you can see kind of little blue dots, and that's actually the beadwork, a photo of the beadwork that's been burned into this plate. And then the border, when it crows through our beadwork, we often have this kind of border, and you can see it on my belt and on her belt. It's sort of like this striped border, and that's how it encloses us. But for me, my mom took this picture of me, and I took this picture of my daughter. And of course, my mom dressed me in my outfit when I was a little girl, and I dressed my daughter. And then my daughter's actually holding a doll that my grandmother made. So it's very, very much about matrilineal passing down. So that sums up that piece. Thank you.
I thought that was a picture, that both of those pictures were your daughter, and I'd wondered why her bangs looked so different. So now I understand it wasn't her, but the dress, I saw the dress looked very, similar and almost identical, I thought. So anyway, I would like to just offer the students, if you have any questions, does anybody have any questions for Wendy?
Totally cool.
Yeah. No questions? Oh, very interesting question from one of our students. We have an art history class here, and we have, I think it's a painting class that's here. One of the art history students asked if you would speak to being included in the Plains Indian Artists of Earth and Sky exhibition, and the limited number of contemporary artists, if you have anything to say about that at all with that show.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting show, because it originally showed in France, and I believe a lot of the collections and the older material. And that show came from the museums over there. And so originally I wasn't in that exhibition, and they did have some contemporary work, but it was more like what I like to title it as traditional contemporary. So it's artists that are living now but making more traditional style work, or referencing older work, like Rhonda Holybear's work is in there, that kind of stuff. So it's more, or maybe it's like contemporary craft work. There's Kevin, I always say his last name wrong, Poirier. Thank you. And so he's using like the inlaid buffalo horn, which is contemporary, but it's more, I would say, more craft-based than, conceptual, or not conceptual, but contemporary fine art. We can argue about this later, but they had already made the catalog with those pieces that were in the exhibition in France, and then it traveled to the Nilsson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, and the Nerman Museum, which is also in Kansas City, had purchased, and they actually have a really excellent contemporary Native arts collection in their museum, and they purchased the Four Seasons, and that's when my work, they decided to use it at the Nerman Museum because they had more space. So it's sort of interesting, because I believe, like in France, my take was that they didn't have, each space is different, so some of the spaces allowed for more things, and I think they were tapped out of the traditional, or the sort of the more artifact stuff, so there was room for more contemporary work. And at the Nilsson Atkins, that's when mine got added in. A few other artists got added in, and then it transferred over to the Met. And I didn't see it at any of those other venues. I did go to the Met, and the Met's really interesting because they deal with dead artists, and there were eight of the artists that showed up, and we did do a tour. And then our work, the contemporary art, the living artists, we were in the last room, and it was one small room, and it was very cramped. And it just kind of, my sense was that that they just sort of felt like, it almost felt a little bit like it wasn't an afterthought, because they did include it, but just the way that it was set up is that they very much separated the contemporary from the sort of ancestral objects, and instead of maybe mixing them together, which could have been really interesting, I would have loved to be by some of the crow objects, that kind of thing. I will say, though, that my piece had its own wall, and it was towards the end, and that piece is very much critiquing those very institutions and how they represent and present Native objects. So to me, I thought that was great that you sort of kind of ended the show with seeing sort of the Four Seasons there as sort of the final critique of how an exhibition like that was curated, and how exhibitions like that continue to be curated. But one of the things that I thought was really surprising is that they just asked us at the end to raise our hand if we were present, and without even really acknowledging us by name, or even having us speak for 5 minutes or less than that. But it very much felt like the Met, they didn't know what to do with living artists.
It'd be the truth. We've gone on quite a bit longer than, is there any other questions? I don't want to cut off anybody's opportunity to ask a question. But, all kinds of shakes of the head. So, Wendy, okay, I so appreciate all the time that you've made for us today. And I would like to, I mentioned to the students before we got started that we do have quite a bit of information about you actually as part of our short course. So any of the things that, some of the early work that you described where you were included more often, I think we have materials like that that are up on the short course. So I just encourage the students to go ahead and take a look at that and see what you think about it. And like I said, share with your friends if you like it. Our next Skype event is November 16th with Nick Tupara. And